Scientology could be called, well, you could call it a religion of religions.
Howdy everybody, and welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast, brought to you from the freeway connecting Melbourne and Sydney, the Hume Highway. I'm on it right now. I'm on a road trip, and I thought I might as well use some of this time to make a briefing about the origins of Free Zone Scientology, the origins of independent Scientology. Remember, these are closed-door secret briefings about vital information about the world that you need to know. And this is very important information for Scientologists. Actually, I'll move my hand so that you can see me. I won't look at the phone that much. I won't touch it because that's illegal. Because I don't clear words while I'm driving, or like read books while I'm driving, all that sort of stuff. I like literally listen to books while I'm driving. That's actually why I'm very happy to be driving, because it's cheaper and faster to fly. But there's so much to study and listen to. I want a really long drive. So this is really important data, because it's about LRH and Scientology, and did he start a movement, right, to be in competition with the Church of Scientology, which he started as well. And by in competition, I don't mean that they're there to fight each other. It's just that, like, you know, you've got Pepsi and Coke. You know what I mean? It's just like they're both providing a service that the public want, and they both should have the best drink that they can get at the best price. And then it leads to everyone having great drinks. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's a bad... People can view competition in this hyper evil capitalistic type of way, where, like, you know, the other side's my enemy and I've got to, you know, stuff them up so that I get ahead, and I'm the only one who controls the industry. That's the way the bankers view the world. That's the way how SPs view the world. They have this extreme hyper competitive way, whereas I view competition, and I think, well, actually, this is where I'll get into it, but anyway, I view competition as in a way where it's like, it's good that someone builds staircases and that someone else builds staircases, and that they compete with each other, because it challenges them to be the best staircase builder. And then across society, you go around, and if you want a staircase built, you've got someone who you can call, and they're going to do a good job. And when someone who builds bad staircases comes along, then they go bankrupt because they're crappy. Anyway, competition's good, basically. It's an economic thing. They don't really teach it at school, but yeah, it's a good thing. So did L. Ron Hubbard, right, create Scientology and then see towards the end of his life that he needed to come up with a second form of Scientology in order to bring Scientology to the world? It seems like that's what happened from looking at the evidence over the whole of history, like the history of Scientology, listening to the stories, looking at what went on. Because I'll go over the history of Scientology, and then I'll say when it seems like things changed. Okay, so he started Scientology in the early 50s, and then and there was this cool, unusual religion. It was an alternative thing. Alternative things weren't as big back in the 50s. There was a lot of just conservative Christian. It was very, Western society was very, I guess, thought controlled. It was just very homogenous is probably the word. Very similar, you know, like right across the board. It's just like, you know, you just pop in somewhere and here's a guy, he's a Christian, he's a white male, he's got a few kids, he's got a wife. That model was very common in the 50s. That's what my grandpa was like. That's what many other people's grandpas were like. That's what many other people's parents were like. That's what many old people were like. Really old people, if they're watching this video, because that generation's almost dead now. There might be some really old guy that's like 90 years old that's watching this video. But that's how things were. But then things started to get funky in the 60s, and people started to be more open to new ideas and different ways of living their life and stuff. Now with Scientology was this unusual, funky thing because it wasn't, conservative Christian stuff. So these sires in the 50s were sort of funky, and they were a sort of different thing. But that's what Scientology was. It was funky, it was sort of different and stuff. And it was a small, really small, like super small minority group. It was like, I don't know how many people, like let's say in the late 50s, I don't know how many people were into Scientology across the world, but I don't know, it might have been like 50,000 or something like that. People who were reading the books, who were doing the exercises. That's what was going on. And what Hubbard noticed was that the media were attacking Scientology, and the governments were attacking Scientology, and he realized that there were SPs out there who didn't want his religion to expand and didn't want mankind to improve, to be honest, and just wanted to enslave mankind and use them like cows. Use the average Joe like a cow that's just to be milked and to be controlled, and doesn't want the average Joe thinking for himself, but just thinking whatever he's told to think, and just brainwashed into just commercialism and just doing what the corporations say. So what happened in the what happened in the mid 60s was that the attack, as Scientology continued to grow, the attacks on Scientology continued, and Scientology got banned in Victoria in Australia, which is what I'm driving through right now. I'm in central Victoria. I'm leaving Melbourne, and Melbourne's quite a lefty place. It's got a fairly biggish government. It's got some strong SPs in Australia in Melbourne, and so that's why it got banned in Melbourne. Out of all places in the Western world, Melbourne was the first place to ban it, and I think some other places banned it as well. But when this ban happened of Scientology, literally it was just banned by the powers that be in Melbourne. When that happened, that scared Hubbard. And there was, some other bannings and some other attacks. And so that was when Hubbard was like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? Like, this world's a crazy place. Like, I'm just trying to come up with a religion and I get banned. His church in Washington, D.C. also got raided or something by the government over there. And so he could see how the government in America and England were looking to do the exact same thing that they did in Melbourne. It's just Melbourne happened to be the first one that it got passed, because I think there's more SPs in power in Melbourne. That's why I think that happened. But he saw, this is the plan. They want to just outright make it illegal to be a Scientologist all across the Western world, and they want to shut down Scientology. So he suddenly went, oh my God, I've got a battle on my hands. I've got to fight for my religion. And at this point, he started the Sea Org, because I think that he realized he needed a hardcore group of dedicated Scientologists to fight for this religion. So he starts the Sea Org, right? And the Sea Org, and he also starts to change the Scientology ethics, and Scientology sort of stopped becoming this sort of cool, alternative, free, sort of funky religion, and it started to become more strict. And that's pretty much because the government was infiltrating Scientology. If the government wasn't trying to attack it and make it legal and shut it down, Hubbard wouldn't have had to have increased the ethics and the strictness of Scientology and the Sea Orgness, that ugly Sea Orgness, that Nazi Sea Orgness, which is like strict and like boom, boom. It wouldn't have had to have been the case if it wasn't for the attacks on Scientology. Hubbard wouldn't have done that, right? Now, he releases the Sea Org in like 1967, and as the Sea Org, it wasn't like Scientology suddenly became a strict organization, like paramilitary organization. It didn't suddenly become like that because it takes time to release the new policies and stuff. But over time, from the mid-60s onwards, Scientology became just more strict and not as fun, and became a bit more of like the members were like controlled as to what they can think and what they can do. But in the early 60s, the members were quite free and funky, and they had a lot of freedoms. You know, they weren't told off by their church for masturbation, you know, or they weren't told off for this or that. But as the ethics grew, they, you know, just became more and more strict, and more and more strict as to what it is today, where the members are quite highly controlled, and, you know, if they want to get divorced, they have to check with the church, and if they want to do this, they have to check with the church. And it's just like, you know, if they want to do meditation, they can't do that because the church says they can't. It just became more and more strict. And you can watch the size of the ethics book that I think Hubbard actually released the ethics book, and it wasn't even a book when it started off. It was almost like a pamphlet. In the 60s, I mean, it was like a pamphlet. It was like the smallest book. It was like a short story. It was so small and thin, but you can see the size of it. It grows and it grows and it grows. So Hubbard started up this strict organization with heavy ethics in the mid-60s, and it just grew more and more and more. And then Miscavige took over, and he was even more extreme than Hubbard. Hubbard, I think, increased the ethics to a level that might have been necessary at that time, but then Miscavige came along and he took it to a whole new level, and the ethics book just boomed in size massively, and ethics increased massively, and sect checking increased massively. Like, sect checking wasn't a massive thing in the early 60s, you know, but I don't even think it almost barely existed, but just increased more and more and more. And so he had the sect checking because he was trying to spot government agents who were infiltrating Scientology, and it was because of the enemy. So the enemy attacked him, and then he increased the strength of Scientology, made it a close-knit, tight group, cult-like, in order to protect itself from the government. And I think that it's understandable that he did this because you weren't around at that time. But if you were around in the 60s and you saw the attacks and you were in his shoes, you would think, oh, this is what we need to do to protect Scientology. Because he didn't want it getting just banned across the world and just getting shut down. This is what happened to Scientology, right? And then as time went on into the 70s, more and more intelligence stuff and more people infiltrated Scientology and started corrupting it. And it got out of hand. Hubbard lost control of it as time went on, right? Because what happened in the 70s was that the government, certain people were literally trying to assassinate L. Ron Hubbard. There were agents sent in to the church to try and hunt Hubbard down and kill him, right? So this is why we can't criticize Hubbard's strange behavior or him yelling, because this is when he started to really yell, that whole Nazi, full-on screaming, like strict, I don't even know if Nazi is the right word, but like that paramilitary-like organization, because the military does that where they yell and they're like, whoa, whoa. This is when this started to happen, you know, because people were trying to fucking kill Hubbard. You know what I mean? Imagine if you were in charge of a corporation and agents were being sent into your corporation to try and hunt you down and kill you. You know, I doubt you're going to remain calm and relaxed. It's understandable that his behavior started to go a bit strange, and it was because people were trying to kill him. And this is absolute fact. They were trying to kill him. The intelligence agencies were sending in mind-controlled zombies, right? Literally, because they can do that. They can take someone, mind control them, and send them off, and that person is no longer in control of their body, and they're like under mind control, and they're trying to hunt down and kill someone. This is how they killed John Lennon, because John Lennon was becoming politically a problem to the powers that be. He knew about the UFO topic, which the government was covering up. He didn't like the war and all that stuff, Vietnam and all that. And they took someone, did their pain drug hypnosis mind control thing and set that person off, and then that person hunted down John Lennon and killed him. And when he killed John Lennon, he wasn't even aware of his own behavior. He was like in a hypnotic state. So this was actually happening to some people in Scientology. They were sent in there to go into Scientology to collect data. They were mind controlled to collect data about Scientology, or to literally find Hubbard and kill him and stab him and stuff. So at this point in like the 70s and stuff, Hubbard was like, oh my God, I have to ramp up the security, I have to ramp up the sec checks, I have to spot the government agents, and I have to not be as public. He can't just do lectures and dance around and appear in public, because he'll just get shot. And this was a similar thing that happened to Hitler in the 30s. As in the 30s, he was much more public, but as the war went on, the intelligence agents from England and America and Russia and stuff were trying to hunt Hitler down and assassinate him. And he couldn't appear publicly and speak at a public event, because the chances of him getting assassinated were just more and more and more. And so what Hitler actually got into was that he used body doubles. But yeah, I mean, that's what you have to do. They find someone that looks just like him, and that person goes into the public event, because it's just too risky. You don't want to end up like JFK. He appeared in public. Certain people didn't like him. He was making changes they didn't like, and they assassinated him, and they blamed it on someone who didn't really do it. That's the truth about the JFK thing. But this is what happened to Hubbard. He, in the 70s, recognized, I have to basically come off lines, sort of. Like, I have to stop being a public person. And his amount of lectures, his amount of photos, because he doesn't want people seeing what he looks like, because then it's easy to spot him. He had to sort of go into semi-hiding in the 70s, right? Some people, some free zone Scientologists actually believe that he secretly died at that point, or something like that. That's not the case. He was still alive up until 1986. It's just that he had to go into hiding, and he had to change the way he was playing his game. He couldn't be as public, because otherwise he might get shot or stabbed or something. So then he went along, and what happened in 1977 was that the attacks increased even more. And this is where his Guardian's office, which is like his little intelligence agency, his CIA, they were protecting him and stuff, and it was run by his wife, Mary Sue. In 1977, the Guardian's office got busted for some shifty stuff that they were doing, but it was necessary. It was called the Snow White operation. In 1977, Hubbard the government basically busted Mary Sue for some stuff that they'd done, and now his hiding had to go to a whole new level in 1977. So around 1960s, around the mid 60s, he suddenly realized I have to come up with a Sea Org and I have to change my game plan. So he had to change how he was operating and stuff. And then he had to increase security. And then around 1972, when he realized that people were full-blown trying to kill him, he had to increase security again. Then around 1977, he was like, oh my God, I really have to go into hiding. And so then he really went into hiding. There was barely any photos of him from 1977 onwards, barely any public things he did. And he really was in hiding from 77 onwards. There was also lawyers trying to sue the pants off him left, right and centre, because the way our legal system works is anyone can sue anyone over anything. So let's say the powers that be hated Hubbard, corporations hated Hubbard, Sykes hated Hubbard, the intelligence agencies didn't like how Hubbard was giving people psychic abilities, because the intelligence agencies were keeping those psychic abilities to themselves, right? This is really true, because you can exteriorize, go somewhere and collect data, right? So that's something that the CIA really like, and the CIA wanted big time, right? Because they can go somewhere as a spirit, they can send an agent to try and hunt down Osama bin Laden or something, or they can get a person with this psychic ability to sit down in a chair for 3 hours and go in his mind spiritually to where Osama bin Laden is and collect data and then report on it, and then the CIA can use that. So this is a very important tool for the CIA. So there are numerous people who are after Hubbard, because the CIA, not only did they want this psychic ability, this ability to exteriorize, not only did they want it for themselves, they didn't want other people having the ability. They didn't want the Russians getting it. They didn't want the Turks getting it. They didn't want average Joes getting it. They want to be the only one having it, because it'll be their tool. And they considered it national security that only they get this remote viewing, this psychic exteriorization ability. They want to be the only ones who can have it. So there was numerous groups wanting to have something to do with Scientology and shutting it down or controlling it or whatever. They just didn't want it being free. So in 77, he increased his security again, because the attacks increased massively and people were trying to sue him and trying to attack him. So if he just appeared in public, he would have about 5 lawyers rock up with paperwork and go, you are on Hubbard, you're served. You have to rock up to court. So if he appeared in public, he could get assassinated. He could have 3 lawyers walk up to him and say, here's paperwork, you're getting sued. And these are thousands and thousands of dollars and thousands of time these lawsuits are. So if he appeared in public, that's his, ability to do anything written off, because he would be busy having to handle these lawsuits. So this is what you'll notice about big shots, is they have to basically go into hiding, because it's not just Hubbard, it's other big shots. Howard Hughes, the billionaire, had to do it as well, because he doesn't want to spend the next 6 months of his life battling a court case and then another court case, because certain people know that you can use the legal system as a way to attack people. You can use the legal system to legitimately sue someone when there was a dispute, but also you can use the legal system to just hound your enemy and bring your enemy down, and it's like an attack way, and it's a way of bleeding money from your enemy, because your enemy has to spend heaps of money, thousands of dollars on lawyers. So Hubbard really went into hiding in 1977. And then his wife actually went to jail for a few years, and the GO, right, when Hubbard, things really went wild when Hubbard's, Hubbard really sort of lost control of the church when he... Okay, sorry about that. I just had a friend call me who was a Scientologist. And I'm trying to just remember where I was up to. So what I was saying is that Hubbard was changing the way how he was operating and how he was running Scientology. He changed it in the mid-60s, changed it in the early 70s, he changed it in the late 70s, and then I think he changed again in the early 80s. And in the early 80s, he completely, almost completely went off lines. And that was also partially because he was kicked off lines, because bad people got in the way of his communications to the church, because he went into full hiding and just wrote Mission Earth and did some things, but he went into a lot of hiding and really couldn't do much at all. And also he was old, so he was in retirement. And he was dependent on a few people that were handling his communications that were going to the church and from the church. And so he was very susceptible. It wasn't like he was on the Apollo ship where he was right there in the ship, in control of the communication lines, right there, and people could reach him and he could communicate. He just had a few little people he had to rely on. If there was some bad apples that were passing on the letters to and from the church, then it's easy to stuff up his comm. Let's say you're the CIA and you're wanting to control the Church of Scientology. You just need to put your guy as one of the persons who passes on the letters, and bam, you can change the communications going into the Church of Scientology. So Hubbard could say, spend $1,000 on advertising or something, and the CIA person could see that communication and he could get the letter, he could copy it, change it, then send it on, and he secretly changed it, and then it goes into the church and the order has been changed. You see what I mean? So L. Ron Hubbard was in a really vulnerable position at this point, right? And then communications, you might be like, yeah, but L. Ron Hubbard would find out about how his church was going. And then it's just like, no, he was in hiding. And if you handle the communications there wasn't the internet back then. If you handle the communications that are going to L. Ron Hubbard, you can change what they say. So some good Sea Org member, some top Sea Org member could say, hey Hubbard, what the fuck is going on? There's changes being made to the church, the text being changed, blah, 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 blah. And you as a CIA operative could go, oh, this is an interesting letter, bin, and just pop it in the bin. Or I'm going to change what it says in the letter. And so Hubbard doesn't really hear the truth of what's going on. So this is the point where it gets interesting, because Scientology, it did change quite a bit in the mid-70s, mid-60s with his Sea Org and stuff. But it not compared to how things changed around 1982. This is a full-on fork in the road. This is a change. Hubbard really went off lines, really lost ability to control the church. And you can see this in the tech volumes. There's all this stuff he writes in 1982, and then suddenly, bam, the amount of bulletins he writes just drops off massively in 83, and things really change. And I think it was, because he really had to go into hiding at this point. He'd lost control of the church. Someone else had got involved with the communications, and it could be David Miscavige, that were going into the church. And they were changing things. So what we have here is L. Ron Hubbard, who's a really smart guy, who kept his marbles right up until 1985. That's what the evidence indicates. I've read Mission Earth. I can tell when he wrote that series. I can date check it and all this sort of stuff. He seemed to have written it after he got exposed to a James Bond movie that was released, I think, in 82 or 83, because it seems like he watched this movie, he was really inspired by it and got ideas from this movie to write Mission Earth. And the way it is, it seems very 80s. He didn't write it in the 70s and then they just released it in mid 80s. I mean, he wrote it when it said he wrote it. And I think the same as well with Battlefield Earth. He didn't write it in 77, he wrote it in like 80 or 81, and then got released in 82. Or even might have written it all at the start of 82, right? But that's why it was really important for me looking into these fiction books to try and work out when did he write these things so that I could work out what he was doing with his life. It seems like he seriously went off lines around 82 and he just wrote Mission Earth, a 10-book saga, a massive thing, and worked a little bit on music and maybe a little bit on tech as well. But he was really out of the scenes. He was out of the loop as to what was going on in Scientology. Now, he shows signs of being very switched on, very smart, right up until he died. So he didn't go nutty as an old man, right? I don't believe that. I believe he did go more PTS and had some illness problems and yelled at people more. Like in the early 70s, there was a point where he started really yelling at people because he started really going PTS and getting angry and stuff, but he was still switched on and smart. So L. Ron Hubbard, we know, was a trained intelligence agent in World War II. Also, quite possibly, he was still doing minor little missions into the 50s and stuff, even the 60s. So he's very smart, he's very switched on. I don't believe that he was tricked by the people who were handling the communications going to him. I don't believe that he thought that he was in control of the church. I believe that he full-on knew that he lost control of the church. I believe that he full-on knew that the enemy had infiltrated his church. He's so switched on, he's so smart to conspiracies and stuff like that. He's not the sort of person that can get conned by an event like 9/11. This is his own freaking church. I don't believe he could get tricked by the people who were altering his comms. I'm sure that he knew that he lost control of the church. And how do I know this? Well, there's evidence for it, but there's also Captain Bill who literally says this. Captain Bill said that he spoke to L. Ron Hubbard around 1980, and L. Ron Hubbard said, "I'm starting to lose control of the church. I'm losing communication with the church. I'll write a comm to the church to say do this, and then they wouldn't do it. They'll do something else." And so he was noticing this because he's freaking smart, right? And he said to Captain Bill, he said this. He said, "If you don't hear from me for 6 months," he said, "I'm going to write to you every 6 months. If you don't hear from me, that means that I've lost control of the church." So every 6 months, Hubbard would write Captain Bill a communication, letting him know how you're doing, this is what's happening. If you don't get these communications, it means that somebody else is in control of the communications, and I can't get communications to top Sea Org members in the church, right? He's lost control of the management of the Sea Org, is what I'm trying to say. So he said to Captain Bill, he was worried this was happening because he could spot it and he knew about government agents and all this sort of stuff. So, he said, if you don't receive any comms from me every 6 months, leave. This is where this whole briefing reaches a climax. He drops a big bomb. He says, leave the church and start up outside the control structure of the church. So that's a really big thing that L. Ron Hubbard said, because L. Ron Hubbard basically acknowledged around 1980 that his church that he created, his Scientology that he created, has been infiltrated by the government, and it's going to get shut down, or it's going to go down a path that he doesn't want it to go down. It's going to start becoming a whole squirrel organization, tech-wise and administration-wise. So he realized, oh my God, I need a plan B for Scientology. Scientology, as I want it to be, he thought, is not going to last if I just let these people take over control of the church. Someone has to start up Scientology outside the church, outside this control structure which now the government has got in control of. So this is why he said to a good friend, a top Sea Org member, he got a Khan, Captain Bill. He was a captain of one of the ships, Hubbard respected him. He said, if I lose control of the church, the way you will know that is that you won't get any communication from me. And at this point, you have to leave the church and start up Scientology outside the church, right? And he might have even said free zone Scientology, or he might have mentioned to Captain Bill, because Captain Bill said this, might have mentioned 10 years earlier to Captain Bill. There was another point where he might have mentioned, because I've heard this from someone else, call it free zone Scientology. He actually said, he goes, start up a free zone of Scientology, a Scientology that's free from the structure of the church, right? Because in the 60s, it seemed like he was against the so-called squirrels, right? He was against people doing Scientology outside the official structure, because he was like, I'm in control of this official structure. I invented Scientology. The copyrights are mine. All the income should go to me. They should all do what I say. I'm determining what the standard tech is. That's how he was very dictatorship-like, because he believes that's the best way things should be. And it kind of is true. Like, if you get a really smart person, you want that person to be the CEO or the dictator, because when that really smart person is in control, they really blossom the country and make it really, really cool. It's democracy that's actually pretty shit, because you might get a really talented person that becomes the president, but they just can't get bills passed and can't get anything done. But Hubbard knew the real truth was actually the dictatorship can actually really produce the best results. It's like a business. You have some really talented high IQ person come along and, you go, well, I don't want you to have complete control. We're going to have like a little group, and the group votes on the changes to the business. And it's just like, you're not going to have the best business ever. It's like, this guy's really talented, really smart. Make that guy the full-on boss, and every order has to go through him, and he is in complete control of the business. That's a good way to run the business, because he's clearly smart, he's clearly talented. Just go by what this guy says. He knows his shit. It's like you're out in the woods and you're lost, and one of the guys in the group is a really talented navigator and is a really talented bushwalker. And it's like, are you going to come together and make the group vote on decisions as to where to go in the bush? Or are you just going to go, let's just go with this guy, he knows his shit, he's smarter than all of us? So I personally believe in dictatorship, and Hubbard actually believes it as well. And he said in KSW, dictatorship is better than democracy because the group is aberrated and the group tend to choose bad decisions. It's just absolutely the truth. We've just been brainwashed into thinking dictatorship is bad because of Hitler, and because the people who control our society don't like dictators, and they make out that dictators are these crazy nutcases that when they get into power they just kill everyone. That's not true. That's just not true. There can be good dictators that everyone loves, that everyone agrees with, and you can have a really booming society. So anyway, Hubbard was for dictatorship with his Scientology, and he was against the actual squirrels. But then he changed his game plan, because when he lost control of the Church of Scientology and he saw that he got infiltrated by the government, he realized that oh my God, I've lost control of Scientology. We now need some squirrels. We now need people operating outside this control structure I've set up, because the government's in control of it and they're just going to suppress the hell out of it and change the tech and degrade it and all this stuff. So this is why he said this come to Captain Bill, knowing Captain Bill knew the tech and was good with the tech and the admin tech, just the tech in general, which Captain Bill was. He was quite knowledgeable in both those things. He said, if this happens, you are to leave the church and start up your own Scientology, and hopefully Scientology can continue to grow outside that structure, because now that whole structure is controlled and that cycle has kind of failed. So basically he's come up with a plan B for Scientology. Plan A was the church, Sea Org, this dictatorship-like organization that was going to spread Scientology around the world and bring about a whole new civilization on planet Earth and prevent World War III and bring everyone uptone, and it would be awesome. But then the bad guys infiltrated that, and he said, okay, now plan B, which is Free Zone Scientology. And he literally said the words Free Zone to Captain Bill and some other guy as well. In the early 70s, I think he used the word Free Zone, because at that stage they were shooting around the Mediterranean on their ship, the Apollo, and what they would do is they would arrive in ports around in different countries, and in those ports there's a free zone, and that free zone is where there's no government taxes and there's just no government. You just arrive as a ship and no one's in control in that area. There's no police, it's just a free zone, no government control. But then if you go into the part of the port or the bay or whatever where there is no free zone, then you have to follow the government rules. You have to charge taxes on what you sell or whatever. If you're a business, you're suddenly under government control. So the people on the Apollo and the people running these ships in the Sea Org were aware of the idea of free zone. A free zone, an area that just has no government control, like an area where you go out into sea and it's like international waters and there is no law. It's just like a free zone. So Hubbard was aware of this concept, so that's why he possibly said, call it Free Zone. You go and start a free zone of Scientology, a solid Scientology that's outside government control, that's outside a big organization control. So he said this to Captain Bill. So time went on and Captain Bill didn't get communications from L. Ron Hubbard. And Captain Bill couldn't get communications to L. Ron Hubbard because some government agent or some SP was on the lines controlling the communications. So Captain Bill realized, he saw the changes in the church, realized it had been infiltrated, because Captain Bill was switched on to conspiracies as well. He was educated in them, he was smart. And he realized, well, I've got to do what LIH said, I've got to go start the Free Zone Scientology. Now, I don't think Captain Bill made that up. I think that he's telling a legitimate story, because it's backed up by some other top Sea Org member who got a Karkan as well, who was on the ships in the early 70s, and he heard this idea of Free Zone and independent Scientology from L. Ron Hubbard. I think he was mentioned, he was told a similar thing by Hubbard on the ship, like one day you might have to start up a Scientology outside all of this. Right? There was also a guy around about the same time called David Mayo, and he again was a top Sea Org member, but he was a more he was more a tech kind of guy. He wasn't, a captain of the ship. He was more like an expert CS, right? And he said, apparently David Mayo said he got a letter from L. Ron Hubbard or something. And David Mayo, by the way, was really respected by L. Ron Hubbard, and L. Ron Hubbard, David Mayo was auditing L. Ron Hubbard. That's how much L. Ron Hubbard respected him. And so David Mayo got a letter from L. Ron Hubbard, and it said something like, I'm getting old, I'm dying, probably going to die soon or something. And, you're going to have to take over the reins of the tech and make sure that the tech is good, because society changes. Like L. Ron Hubbard, while he was developing the tech in his 50s and 60s, he was having to come up with new things to fix up the tech as society was changing. For example, he came up with the Purif. Now, they didn't need the Purif in the 50s because there wasn't teenagers hanging out smoking pot and trying cocaine on the weekends. So when you have a 25-year-old walk into the org in 1957, their body doesn't have as many chemicals in them and drugs that are polluting them. So they didn't need a Purif. But by the late 70s, the government, people actually within the government were dealing drugs more. That's the truth about the drugs. It's a whole long story, but drugs were just becoming a big thing. And so when they were handling people's cases, they were dealing with problems where people were having polluted bodies from toxins from the drugs and stuff. So Hubbard released the Purif. So Hubbard would see how society was changing and then release tech to handle that. So he said to David Mayo, look, I'm dying, you're going to have to take over the tech, and you're going to have to come up with changes as society changes. So David Mayo got this letter and basically realized, oh my God, I'm going to become the head of, at that time he was actually the CS International. So he was the top CS in the whole world, the top CS in the Sea Org. So David Mayo was like, oh my God, basically Hubbard's handing the reins of the tech over to me. And he also said, and this is the big point, this is again the climax, in this comm, he didn't just say, look after the tech, and sorry, actually there's a bit more before that. He also said that he was noticing that management were interfering with the quality of the tech. So basically, management were trying to get their stats up, and they were trying to make people attest to grades quicker, and basically stat pushing was fucking up the quality of the tech, and he was noticing this. And this is absolutely a truthful fact. That's absolutely what I noticed when I was involved with the church, that management would stat push, and then they'll get involved with the tech, and they'll rock up into the objectives course room, and they'll put pressure on the supervisor and the auditor to make sure that PC finishes his objectives that week at Thursday at 2 p.m. This is why I really hate stat pushing. I don't think it helps Scientology at all, because Scientology, processes and studying courses, they take as long as you take. And what's so good about Scientology is you don't have 6 months to finish that university degree. Because when you go to universities in the WOG world, they're like, you become a doctor, or you study year 11 at high school, and it's like you've got to do something within that time spot, and it doesn't matter whether or not you've fully understood that maths equation. It's like you're doing it now. And so what you'd end up doing is you're having all these students graduating, and they're all quick-eat students. They've all been dumbed down. They haven't really achieved the full EP of becoming a doctor or becoming a student. That's why the school system's so dumb. Now, that philosophy was coming into Scientology, and it could be because L. Ron Hubbard encouraged the idea of people getting their stats up, but it got manic. It just stuffed up. It just did not work out. And so the admin people were pressuring the tech people to do things, and it was stuffing up the quality of the tech. And because the admin people weren't knowledgeable of the tech, they didn't know what they were doing. Now, LRH noticed this around 1980 and said to David Mayo, hey, you're going to have to watch out for this. You're going to have to watch out for management stuffing up the tech, trying to stat push. That's a big point to remember, right? Now, in this letter, the big climax of it was that he mentioned he mentioned that. I think he either mentioned that he's losing control of management, or he mentioned that management were, like I said, stuffing up the quality of the tech. And he said, you might have to go start up Scientology independently of the church. He literally said you might have to go get the materials and start it outside the church, basically to start an independent Scientology. So at the same time, we get evidence and communications indicating that L. Ron Hubbard knew that there was something wrong with the church. He'd lost control of it, and the quality of tech was going down. And secondly, that he was saying to top Sea Org members, leave the church and go start outside this organization, right? So basically, this is a plan B. It's got plan A, which is the Church of Scientology and the Sea Org and all that. And then around about 1980, he switches because he realized plan A didn't work out, and he goes to a plan B. And anyone who is very clever and good with missions, and the military does this and that sort of stuff, and intelligence agents do that, they always have plan Bs, and they actually always have plan Cs. But they definitely have plan A and plan B. Well, firstly, obviously, whenever they go to do anything, they've got to have a plan A, but they definitely have a plan B without a doubt. Like, for example, when they did their little 9/11 stunt, you know, let's say one of the airplanes they lost control of or something. Do you think at that point they didn't have a plan to handle if they lost control of one of the airplanes, or if one of the buildings didn't come down? Do you think they just didn't have a plan B? No. In fact, what they had more than just a plan A, B, and C. Because there was so many cycles of action that make up the big event of 9/11. For example, plane gets hijacked, plane hits building, plane comes down, next plane gets hijacked, next plane hits building, next plane comes down, building hits Pentagon, building hits out in the bush. There's numerous cycles of action going on. So at any point, one of those cycles of actions could stuff up. So they have a plan B for that cycle of action stuffing up. So what you get as a 9/11 event is a whole branch, like literally a tree that branches out. And so you start off with the very first cycle of action, which is a first hijacking. And if that's stuffed up, of course they're trying to make it work 100%, but if it's stuffed up for whatever reason, right, because you've got all these things going on, you can't have it all perfect. If that stuff's up, you switch to plan B. And so then and then from plan B you go along and things go, that occurs, and then, oh, this didn't occur, so then they switch to the plan B of that thing. So it ends up being like a little maze, like a tree branching out. So they have a whole event that has numerous plan A, B, and C's to make sure they always have something to do in case something stuffs up. This is how smart the intelligence agents are. Now, L. Ron Hubbard, what I'm trying to say is that L. Ron Hubbard was trained in intelligence, was switched on, and he wouldn't have just come up with the Church of Scientology and just left it at that. He would have come up with a plan B. And possibly even a plan C, you know. So I think that the evidence indicates that L. Ron Hubbard started Free Zone Scientology around 1980. L. Ron Hubbard actually started independent Scientology, and because he said Free Zone Scientology to two people, I've heard, in the early 70s, to use that word, and because they were in the ships in the Mediterranean, that is the correct word to use for people doing Scientology outside the church. We are Free Zone Scientologists. There are Church of Scientology Scientologists, and then there are Free Zone Scientologists. And I believe that if somebody is doing just not following the bridge, skipping the bridge, creating clears in just 11 hours, like this guy who's claiming he's the reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard, these people are squirrel Scientologists. So that is the correct term to use for these people. They are actually squirrel Scientologists because they're not following Scientology. They're not trying to keep true to the tech as per when L. Ron Hubbard released it in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Right? So this is also a video that's actually helping to define the different types of Scientologists, because I know that church members are tricked into thinking that free zone Scientologists, independent Scientologists, Scientologists doing it outside the church, whatever term you want to call, they're tricked into thinking that these people are squirrel Scientologists. That is false data. That is not correct. The truth is that they are free zone Scientologists, and they are actually striving to achieve standard tech as best as they can. And that the ones that are just knowingly doing outrageous stuff and, just skipping whole sections of the bridge and stuff, these people, they're the ones that are squirrel Scientologists and inventing new stuff. The term to use for them is squirrel Scientologists. And then further on top of that, there are some groups like Avatar and Landmark. And they were former Scientologists, and they were people that have gone so far into squirrel practices that they don't even call themselves Scientologists, and they've come up with a whole name, and they are basically other practices is the correct term to call them, but they're just other practices that are inspired by Scientology and have a lot of similarities to Scientology. But I wouldn't even call them squirrel practices. I would reserve squirrel practices to people who are trying to claim that they're Scientologists, but it's not Scientology. I think that's the best use for that word. I think that these people like Avatar have gone so far away from Scientology, and their founders say that, and they intentionally change the tech and everything, and they're very honest about it, and I think they're good people. They're just doing what they think is better tech, and they've got good groups and people have cool wins and stuff, and I plan on one day trying Avatar and Landmark, but what's best term to call them is other practices. So they're the different groups, right? And I don't know what else to say in this briefing, but what I'm saying is, from the stories, from the evidence, it seems that the person responsible for starting Free Zone Scientology is L. Ron Hubbard himself. And this is what's really cool, because if you're listening to this briefing and you're in the SEAL, there's hope. There is a bridge outside Scientology. There are organizations that you can work for, and you'll get treated better, you'll get paid better, you can dedicate your life to it. And it's Free Zone Scientology, and it's actually standard L. Ron Hubbard stuff, and you won't have to put up with RTC changes, David Miscavige changes. Because although I said that I defined the different groups, there's a Church of Scientology group, Free Zone Scientology, and other practices. The Church of Scientology group, you could actually say that it's really the Church of RTC group and the Church of Miscavige group, because when L. Ron Hubbard lost control, L. Ron Hubbard was saying he was losing control in the early 80s. At that point, all these changes came out. RTC came out, they changed DOT levels, the tech changed. So, the truth is that the tech that people were getting in the church, it's no longer the Church of Scientology, it's the Church of Squirreltology. Changed Scientology tech. Really, you could call it the Church of Squirreltology. You could call it the Church of RTC, the Church of Miscavitology. These are actually probably more appropriate terms to call the Church of Scientology. But a lot of people just say the church, and we'll just call it the COS, the Church of Scientology. But the real truth is that it is actually the Church of RTC, the Church of the government, the Church of the infiltrators, the Church of Miscavige. Because he, at that point, was a dictator was handling the communications. He got in control. He became a dictator, and he started changing Scientology. So Scientology, up until 1980, was L. Ron Hubbard's thing, his creation, with some help of other people as well, which church members don't really know, that there was actually a lot of help from other people, a lot more of a team effort with the tech. L. Ron Hubbard didn't come up with all the tech. He came up with like 80% of it. With David Miscavige's takeover around 1980, it became the Church of Miscavige. Scientology became Miscavige's creation. And he, over the years, bit by bit, changed the tech. There was a big noticeable change in the tech in the early 80s. And Captain Bull said, you can no longer get standard tech in the church. And people were noticing this tech was changing from the way L. Ron Hubbard intended them to be. Then there was another big point where the tech was changed. This was in 1996 with the Golden Age of Tech 1. That was another big change in the tech. That was, boom, a massive change in the tech. So early 80s, a big change in tech, but it was still kind of Scientology, but it just wasn't quite. It was squirreled a bit. But in 1996, Miscavige really fucked up Scientology. He really got it away from being workable. And that was where training became this hard slog. It was hard to get FNs, hard to drill things. There was heaps of pattern drills. It really got messed with. And then there was another big change around the golden age of, well, yeah, maybe the golden age of knowledge, we could say. I mean, there was so many changes. There have been minor changes on the way, but I'm just trying to think. I think the big ones were, you know, the takeover in the early 80s, where they changed the OT levels and stuff, and then all these taking increases, and the prices at this time also increased massively. Then the golden age of Tech 1, 1996, and then the golden age of Tech 2 in 2013. So that was another big change on the tech. And here's the truth. The biggest change of the tech was actually in 1996. Miscavige really had control of the church, like 100%. It wasn't 100% in the early 80s. He was still trying to fight to really be the dictator, but he was a full-on dictator by 1996. The changes that he made really fucked up the tech. Like, he full-on changed the definition of an FN. He really changed stuff, and people bogged down, and it really wrecked Scientology. And you can actually notice international stats they just boomed temporarily when this new stuff was released, because people were like, oh, it's this new stuff, and they got into it. But after a few years, then it just plummeted down, and it just wrecked the tech, right? And Miscavige could have been acting off orders from the government, and he just said what the changes were at an event, and he didn't even do them. Like, who knows, right? Doesn't matter. Under his dictatorship control, he really stepped up the tech in 1996, and this allowed for people to really buy into the golden age of Tech 2, because they noticed there was a problem with the tech. And I was around the Scientology at this time, and I noticed there was a problem with the tech. And the whole sales pitch was that the tech had been messed up by editors and SPs who were working in church in the 80s. They didn't tell you that Miscavige actually was one of those SPs. But people bought in to the golden age of Tech 2, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome, man. We're going to fix up the tech and everything. And I thought it was great. And they released the tech, and actually the tech improved. I mean, honestly, because Miscavige had fucked it up so much in 1996, he realized that he had to fix it up or something. And Golden Age of Tech 2 was actually an improvement on the tech. And so people noticed this that were around in the church, that things were better, and we're like, oh my God, Miscavige is the savior, he's so awesome. But it was really him in the first place who fucked up the tech. But people don't know that. I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know anything about Golden Age of Tech 1. I thought it was just some event where they released some drill e-meter machine and new packs. I didn't realise that in 1996 he was saying with Golden Age of Tech 1, we fixed the tech. You know, this is standard tech. Editors had stuffed it up in the past, and this is 100% standard tech, and this is going to boom Scientology. The same things he said with Golden Age of Tech 2. So, really, the Church of Scientology, even though they improved the tech with Golden Age of Tech 2, you're still not getting standard tech because it's been significantly changed. And one of the big changes with the Golden Age of Tech 2 is that they released packs and binders that didn't use the original bulletins by L. Ron Hubbard. This was a big change. So they would have an objective process, and it didn't have HCOB, written 1971 by L. Ron Hubbard, released to blah, 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 edited by blah, 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 blah. And like, it didn't actually have the original com coming from L. Ron Hubbard. In Golden Age of Tech 2, they changed the packs and everything so that it was just like a document that said, objective process 1, you do blah, 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 blah. Now, what this does is, this makes it harder to trace the history of the releasings of the tech and stuff, and it actually allows for more changes to happen in 30 years' time. It'll be easier to release changes in 30 years' time because it hasn't got the written record. Like, people can call bullshit on the changes by RTC if you've got that written record. So anyway, and if you look, and I did a video on it, if you want to look at the student hat, the changes to the student hat, in some of those policies, I look at some policy letters from GAT2, because I got the pack when I was in the church, and I show you, I analysed it because I was on the data evaluators course, and I just came across these changes and I was interested in it, so I did a little investigation, and I show you how L. Ron Hubbard wrote one thing in 1965, then it got changed in 1975 because they stopped using a certain type of ink in the course room or something, and then there was an editing change. Then there was another editing change in the 80s, and another editing change, and another editing change in 2013. And it's just like, oh my God, what a dog's breakfast. These things have been changed so much, and you realise how squirrely they've become. So anyway, I think that's all I want to say. But yeah, so the terms are the Church of Scientology, but it's not to call it, but it's really the Church of Squirreltology, to be honest, or the Church of David Miscavige, to be honest. But it's just, for simplicity, the different types of Scientology are the Church of Scientology, Free Zone Scientology, also known as Independent, and other practices, which is interesting tech that's like similar to Scientology. And the overall conclusion of this video, of me talking to you, thinking about all the data I've studied, and I've studied a lot of data and stuff about the world to understand things, is that the actual truth is that L. Ron Hubbard was super smart, and he came up with a plan B before he died for Scientology. And the plan B is Free Zone Scientology, and that is where the future is. That is where you can get standard tech. It doesn't live in the Church of Scientology. Now, there's one other thing I want to mention. So that's why the whole future depends on Free Zone Scientology and people starting Scientology practices outside the church and making sure that these organisations don't get infiltrated by the government. And if they do, fine then. Let that go away, start up a new organisation and get people into it. I'm not for the church getting shut down. I think it's an interesting thing. I think it's an interesting flavour of Scientology. It's not proper Scientology. I hope that I hope someone in RTC notices changes and fixes the tech, but who cares about it? It failed. Hubbard moves on. Hubbard saw it's time to move on. The government's got control of this organisation. Who cares? But there's one last thing I want to mention, is that There is evidence as well, and I want to talk to Scott Gordon about this. He's like an independent a free zone Scientologist, because we got to use the terms right because it confuses people. He seemed to notice that L. Ron Hubbard might have been sabotaging his own church. And this is interesting because, like I said, we noticed these changes coming out in the early 80s, and we're saying Miscavige is making these changes, or the government or whatever, and they're designed to change Scientology, right? But what if he realized that his church had been infiltrated and taken over at that point, and then he realized that it was becoming evil, and he realized, I want to stuff up this organization because now it's in government control. And he realized, crap, we can't have this organization taking over the world with Scientology, because he wanted everyone's new religion in the Western world, or the whole world, to be Scientology, because it was a better religion, it was much better than Christianity, right? So what if he realized, oh my God, shit, this has backfired, now the government's into control of it, I don't want the government taking over Scientology and making this like a world religion, and this being the religion of the New World Order. Because it would make the Church of Scientology would make a fantastic religion for the New World Order. It's just so perfect because it sucks people in, and it's such a cool, good religion. It's like a modern Cadillac version of Christianity. It's just gold. So he could have realized, oh my God, Church of Scientology could end up enslaving the world pretty much. And that he intentionally made changes like bankrupting all the missions or trying to shut them down and stuff them up, because he knew that was what was a promotion, that was what was promoting the Church of Scientology. Because the missions are where it's at. That's why the church isn't big at the moment. You can build all the ideal orgs you want, but you need to have missions functioning as feeder channels to those orgs. And then those orgs are feeder channels to the AOs, and then Scientology is booming. But you can't cut the Church of Scientology's Div 6. You can't cut the missions. The Church of Scientology has a really bad mission network. That's why they're not booming. That's the secret to booming the Church of Scientology. So Hubbard knew this, because he knew advertising and stuff. He knew, if I stuff up all these missions, if I sabotage Church of Scientology, this can stop Scientology from taking over the world and the government using it and stuff. So it is possible, I don't fully know yet, one day I'll get an answer to this. It is possible that some of these bad changes we do see in the early 80s are actually from L. Ron Hubbard, because he wanted to sabotage the Church of Scientology. Basically, L. Ron Hubbard became a proponent of the free zone in the early 80s, and he realized that the church was evil and it should get shut down. Because there is a bit of a split amongst the free zoners. There are free zoners, like myself, who doesn't give a shit about the church, right? Like, doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Sometimes makes videos where I walk into a church because it's interesting. But like, I mean, I don't care about the church. My initial cognition was, when I realized the church was infiltrated, was, this is a done bridge. I can't be bothered writing comms, changing the church. We need to start up something outside the church. This is where the future is. I don't care about the church. But there are some free zoners who actually believe the church is evil and want the church shut down. Not many of them, though. The church being shut down is more church haters, Scientology haters, also known as the anti-Scientology cult. They're people who hated their experience with the church and now hate Scientology. They really are people who want to shut down the church. But there are some free zoners who don't like the church and kind of want it shut down. So the possibility is that if Hubbard sabotaged the church in the early 80s, it is because he became a free zoner and he became one of these free zoners. He didn't obviously become a person who hates Scientology. That's ridiculous, and he created it, he liked it, he knew it was good. But he became one of these free zoners that wants the church to be shut down, and so he sabotaged it. And so, I mean, the question is, I think of it from my point of view, I left, but I wasn't at top management, I wasn't up there. So I just thought, I don't want to do any changes. Who cares? I mean, who cares about the church? I don't want anything to do with them. But if when I realized that I should leave the church, right, I was like right up there like Hubbard was at the top of the church, and I could have some influence, even though I'd fully lost control, I could have some influence. I would have thought deeper as to, oh, maybe I could shut down the church now, or maybe I could make some changes to sabotage the church. Who knows? We do know that he gave out, it does seem like he became a free zoner in 1980, around that time. And he instructed people to go start the free zone, right? And he knew that the future of Scientology was in these mission networks. Like that's how you promote and advertise and everything. So he could have cut the mission networks on purpose. He could have said, given that order, which was what went around in the early 80s, which was this order that was like the mission networks have to pay heaps of money in fees. They had to follow all these strict rules. It was really strangling the mission network. It was like walking up to them saying, you're going to have to give me, like literally, it was like you have to pay way more fees, whereas before it was just like a little percentage to the church. In the early 80s, the change came through that they had to pay a massive percentage to the church, right? And when I first heard that the amount, it was huge. It was like, instead of like 5 or 10% of their income, it was like 30%. And it was like, you have to follow all these rules. And it was like, to me, it was like, man, this is like you wanted to bankrupt the missions. This isn't like you wanted to just get a bit more fees. You wanted to bankrupt them. This was like you were trying to stuff them up. And some missions did get bankrupt, and some missions refused to go along with the changes and broke away. So this is what I think. Hubbard became a free zoner. He knew that the future of Scientology was in the free zone, and how could he start the free zone? He could contact 2 very top trusted Sea Org members, tell them to go and start up their own centers and stuff, and also try and stuff up these missions, right? Because make these ridiculous changes to these missions, because he knew that these missions were smart, these mission owners were smart guys, liked their income, liked what they were doing, and they wouldn't go along with these orders. So Hubbard knew, right, that yes, some missions would actually get bankrupt by these changes and get taken over by the church, because that's what happened. The mission owners said, oh my God, I can't afford to pay you these fees and these changes. You can just take my mission. And the church literally got to score missions from this mission takeover that happened in the early 80s. But also Hubbard knew that it was like a divide and conquer or whatever. That they would conquer some missions, but then some missions would say, no way, you're not getting my missions. These are like my living and making good money, and these missions are great. I'm not going along with your changes, right? So they would break away. So guess what? This forces them into the free zone. This forces them to become free zone Scientologists. And that is what we see happen. We see mission owners in the early 80s and members who were a part of these missions becoming independent and free zone Scientologists. So, L. Ron Hubbard knew that David Mayo and Captain Bill would be starting up free zone Scientology centers, which they did, and he thought to assist them is we'll get these missions, half of these missions or whatever, to break off and join them. And some of those missions ended up actually breaking off and completely leaving Scientology, and to not becoming free zone and becoming other practices, which was like the landmarks. Well, not really landmark, I don't think, but it was definitely Avatar. Avatar literally was a mission that didn't like the changes, said stuff you, and went and became their whole other practice. Hubbard probably wanted them to follow Captain Bill, Dave Miscavige, and continue to be Scientologists and not go down the squirrel path, but he knew that this rift was going to happen. So that's what we get. We get David Mayo and Captain Bill being assisted by the mission takeover, the mission stuff up, the bankrupting of the mission thing, which occurred in the early 80s. So it is quite possible. The evidence is indicating, and this is what I'm believing now after looking at all the evidence, that yes, he became a free zone Scientologist. He definitely assisted in the starting of free zone Scientology, and he moved on to an Operation Plan B for Scientology. That's what the evidence indicates. And that's it for this briefing. So I hope you liked it. That's some hardcore deep information. It was a lot longer than what I thought I would. There's a lot to this, but it's a really deep thing. The free zone Scientology is where it's at. It's where I think you should be. And it's cool. You're not as controlled. You can go and try Avatar if you want, and they won't come back to you and say, you've been a bad Scientologist, you're controlled, blah, 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 blah. You might go to a free zone org and the guy might say, I disagree with what you did. You can do whatever you want. Depends on the auditor or the center you go to, but it's good because you're not controlled. You can work out and think for yourself and decide what behavior is right for you. And it's way cooler. So that's it. I'm trying to think of a quote to finish off this this video. I got the quotes. So I want to finish off these briefings with LRH quotes. It's on my phone, but I don't want to modify. I don't want to click out of the recording because it might turn off the recording. But actually, I'll find a quote now. Just hold on. Okay, so I don't have a quote on my phone. So I've just got to think of an LRH quote. Oh, I can't remember a specific quote, but I can remember an idea, which is a quote, but I just can't remember the quote. But the idea is, and it's from Problems of Work, and it's good because it's just very useful, and it's when you've got lots of randomity and confusion and stuff going on around you, like maybe you've accepted a new job and there's a phone ringing, and then there's like a delivery coming, and then there's like a course you need to study, and you just got a lot of stuff going on, and you're like, oh my god. The advice from L. Ron Hubbard was just grab something and get it done and do it. So don't sit there going, oh, well, should I answer the phone first, or should I do this course first, and just go into all this confusion and artness. Just grab the nearest closest thing and do that. Then grab the next nearest closest thing and do that. And then all around you, there's less stuff going on, and you can start seeing, oh, I need to do that first, and then I need to do that next. And you can start doing that, and then you don't have all this confusion around you and all this chaos. Because confusion is just there's lots of shit going on. So that's that bit of advice, and that can help you with a business or whatever. So that's it for this briefing. I've been your host, Andy Nolch, the Space Cowboy. You've been listening to the Indie Scientology podcast. So remember, what you thought was impossible, like the data in this briefing, is possible.